Dragon Spirit has asked me a question about origins, and I don't know, it's such a hard problem, but I do have, when I can't imagine how something is even possible, I like to at least create like what you might call a thought experiment, or frankly just science fiction sort of explanation. Try to get at least into a state where there's something conceivable, because even if it's going to be wrong, and you kind of know that because it's just a sci-fi kind of idea, at least you have something to correct, to work from. It's like, well, I can imagine this, and then as you get information that shows, well, I can't imagine that, you adjust it, and hopefully you keep hold of something you can at least imagine, and you zero in on something actual is the idea. So I thought through this thought experiment. Before I go into it, I want to describe the main metaphor I use to think about it, and it's magnetism. You have an iron magnet, a solid magnet. Where does this arise? Most things are not magnetic. And why are some things magnetic? Well, when you look into this, right, everything is magnetic. It's just that mostly the little tiny magnets, the molecules, their jumbled positions and their magnetic fields cancel out, as opposed to in an actual magnet, macroscopic magnet, all the molecules are aligned, or most of them, so that their magnetic fields reinforce one another. So this is what I expect in will. I'm not looking for when something is created, will is created, so much as for a force that is expressing itself all the time, like a magnetic force, but it tends to cancel out. So there might be things out there that have this force, but they don't really act like things with will to us, because it's all canceling out with their neighbors. And this is why I expect some objects show this on the macroscopic level. So there's some force in a rock that could make it conscious, but the rock just isn't in the right arrangement. All the will or consciousness kind of energy, whatever it is when it's, the pieces of this, little tiny quantum pieces of this, or parts of this, are all pointed at each other. And to have an expression of will that we would consider will, they have to be aligned like the molecules in a magnet have to be aligned. Alright, so what's the closest thing that might be this? Well, I noticed in my 20s that there's a perspective similarity between choice and randomness. Like, consider one way to get a random number is, you have one of the people in your group choose a number between 1 and 10. If you don't know their favorite number, if you don't, if you can't track that, then that's the same as random, even though they have chosen it with their will. So from the third person point of view, randomness is indistinguishable from will. Another way to look at it is a person can act random, even though it's their will acting quote-unquote random, right? So the in other words, a person can have a will but not really be thinking and using it, and just flitting along randomly, quote-unquote, from thing to thing, reacting to stuff in their environment. So even it's them deciding, since they're reacting, it's sort of really, they're just become a feature of the environment. So if that's true, I can imagine, this is just the science fiction part here, I can imagine that, let's say an atom can have a will, and what it decides to do is to release its energy. Let's say an atom is an excited atom, has extra energy, it's going to release a photon at some point. Well, when it does that would be something like will, but the atom is not in an arrangement, its will is not aligned with anything else, it has no feedback, it's not coherent with other things going on. So it's like a human being that's deaf, dumb, and blind might have a will and act walking around a room, but it's going to do a random walk because it doesn't have any information to inform it. So it's going to, when you plot that walk, it's going to look like the same as something moving around because of Brownian motion or whatever. It's going to look like a random walk. And so somehow, as this ability is forced on the particles, and they have no way to do anything about it, they bump into other particles and they get into more complicated molecules. And at that point, if one atom in a molecule releases a photon, that can cause that molecule, like firing off a jet, that part of that molecule to swing around. These things are flexible. And suddenly you have releasing energy would have an effect, you know, specifically like the chemical processes that we can't explain in cells are like, well, we see how those things work, but why does that protein actually go over there and get the thing it's working on? You know, it's like, well, perhaps this consciousness is expressing itself all the time to things that can make no use or understanding of it, but it's going on all the time. But by the time the luck of evolution, that a molecule comes together where there is feedback and whatnot possible, then this force, which is constantly like magnetism, it's constantly there, it's just waiting to be aligned, gets some alignment and starts to build up a macroscopic feature of choice and option that we then see in living creatures. All right, cheers. Now remember, this is not a theory of how things are. This is just like a thought experiment or a sci-fi theory, because it's an area that, you know, we don't have solid science. Hopefully nobody would be saying, well, it's absolutely this, that, and the other. So this is a thought experiment to help think it through. I'm not saying it's literally true. Quite the opposite. I mean, as a scientific thing, obviously, you know, there's going to be real details and real systems. But to me, at least I can picture how this might arise, and that we are the systems that are willing, not that we got to the point that a spirit lit up in us or the fires. You know, it's like there are other metaphors actually mentioning fire, you know, where instead of magnetism, I mean, you really don't have the fire. You have the energy in the material, but you don't have the phenomena of fire till the fire actually starts. And consciousness could be something like that. I don't see that totally as contradictory to the magnetism example, and it's probably some sort of a hybrid and actually, you know, yet another model of its own if we knew enough about it. So, okay, cheers.